So what's going on, guys? DIY Dan here again, and this is another episode of Backroads Arizona Dumbass Edition. So in this video, guys, I'm going to be showing you my first rollover that I've ever had in my RZR. Hopefully the last, probably not. So I put my RZR on its side doing a donut. Now a lot of people are going to say you just shouldn't do donuts in these UTVs because they're way too top heavy, and there is a lot of truth to that. However, I had gone out earlier that day and done donuts and figure eights without a problem. So I'm going to go over some contributing factors that help lead to this rollover and how I'm going to reduce those factors so this is less likely to happen in the future. I'm also going to give you some helpful tips on what to look for if you do roll your RZR or UTV before starting it up and going riding again. Then towards the end of this video, I'm going to be showing you the repairs, how I bent my roll cage back, and to get my RZR ready for the next trip. So I'm going to reemphasize one more time, guys, this is still a very high-risk maneuver to do in these UTVs because they are very high profile. The only thing this video is going to do is show you some things that might lessen your chances of going on your side and to help you understand why a rollover happens. So let's get to it. So keep in mind that there are several other contributing factors that can lead you to go over, and every situation is different. This is just a couple that I'm going to tell you about that I know of from personal experience. So keep in mind, guys, I am no physics teacher, so some of my terminology might be a little off, but you'll get the idea of what I'm talking about. So the technical terminology for why a rollover happens in a vehicle is the force of gravity vector passes through the pivot point of the vehicle. My terminology for this when it happened was oh shit. So there's two main reasons you go over. One is the G-forces that you create causes the weight of the vehicle to go through that pivot point. And the other one is that you strike something or get traction that initiates the weight distribution to go through that pivot point. I believe my rollover was a combination of both of those things. One is I had too much weight up top high on my RZR, which caused the G-forces to push that weight through that pivot point. The other is I did think I got some traction as well, which also initiated that weight to transfer through the pivot point. So I actually used my truck to pull this thing back over, and I wish I would have got it on video, but I was getting the riot act from my wife for putting it on its side, so I just didn't think about it. I actually attached the strap to my trailing arm. I couldn't really find another place to grab it from where I didn't think it was going to leverage on the doors and possibly tweak them worse than what they were. So the truck pulled it right over, plus two guys that were camping close to us came over and gave me a hand lifting on the roll cage as well. I think if we would have had one more guy, we wouldn't even have had to use the truck. It actually went over pretty easy. So one of the most critical things to check before starting your RZR back up after it's been on its side or upside down is the oil. Now my RZR was on its side for about 10 to 15 minutes before we got it flipped back over. So even though when I checked my oil, it was still in the okay range, I gave my RZR 10 to 15 minutes of being on its top before trying to start it. And the reason for that is any oil that leaked past the piston rings and into the combustion chamber has that same amount of time to leak down past the rings and get back into the crankcase. So while I was waiting that 10 or 15 minutes to start it up, I went ahead and checked out the rest of my steering components, tie rod ends, etc. to make sure there's nothing bent or broken. And there is another video icon you can click on at the end of this one if you want to see what I take with me in case something like that happens. The other thing you're going to want to check for is obviously any other major fluid leaks that might inhibit you from getting back to camp. Once waiting that 10 to 15 minutes, I did start my RZR up, and I did have a little bit of blue smoke, but that is normal if it's burning off a little bit of oil. Now, if you go to crank it over and it acts like it's binding, that is a very bad sign, and depending on how long you've had the RZR on its side, you could have hydrolocked the engine, or possibly worse. If that had happened to me, what I would have done is pulled the spark plugs out, then try cranking it again. If it was hydrolocked, a bunch of oil is going to spit out of those holes and continue cranking until it no longer is coming out. Then I would have cleaned the spark plug up with whatever I had, went ahead and put it back in, and tried starting it again. If when you have the spark plugs out, it's still not cranking over correctly, At that point, I would have conceded, get a tow back to camp before causing possibly a lot more serious engine damage. So right here, you can see the damage that was done to the roll cage. Now this is a twisted alloy cage. I can't imagine what would have happened if it was the stock cage. Looking on the bright side of things, since I came out of this roll without a single bodily injury, it did make my wife realize that the money we spent on the aftermarket roll cage from Twisted Alloy was a good idea. So there was that one bend in the roll cage, and because that bent down, it actually buckled my roof as well. And then the doors were tweaked a little bit. None of them really lined up right. And I had to give them a good kick on each one to get them to bend back out a little bit so they would line up with the latch. Good enough to make it through the weekend. Once I got it back to the house, I actually made a little bit of the door adjustments and got those lined up and bent back a little better than what I did at the campground. So the rest of the body of the RZR was in good shape. I didn't see any other damage. I did break the bolt off in my main light bar and tweak the bracket a little bit, so I got to bend those back. And then my cornering light and my side mirror did get tweaked and broke a little bit as well, but I was able to straighten both of those back out, no big deal. So we're going to chalk this up to a lesson learned, and now I'm going to go over the contributing factors that help lead to this rollover and how I'm going to reduce them for the future. So when you want to do a donut or corner hard or get the back of the car to slide, basically you are trying to get the rear tires to lose traction. Therefore, they are spinning, not getting traction, which allows the car to slide, basically doing the donut or putting the car sideways around a turn. So when I went over right here, I went from having no traction to having traction, which caused an abrupt change in the geometry of the suspension, which in turn caused an abrupt change in the way the weight was being distributed on the vehicle, which led to it going on its side. Now you'll notice how dry the dirt is where I'm at. That was later in the afternoon, and you'll notice how dirty and wet my car was earlier that day. There was a big mud pit that had dried up a little bit because I was in the general same area, and that allowed me to get less traction because it was slippery when it was wet, and allowed me to do donuts and figure eights without a problem earlier that day. So another contributing factor to the reason I went over was an adjustment I made to the suspension after that morning doing those figure eights and donuts to give me a softer ride for the trail riding we were about to do. So earlier that day, guys, I had my suspension setting pretty much to the hardest setting, which is not going to allow the fluid to transfer very fast in these shocks and not allow the body weight to shift very fast either. When we went trail riding, where we were at was very rocky and I wanted a softer ride, so I softened the suspension setting up, which allows the fluid to travel faster in the shock, which allows that shock to collapse easier and expand easier. So when I went high throttle around that turn, it allowed this shock to collapse all the way and allowed this one to expand all the way and account for that abrupt change in weight, which helped make the vehicle roll on its side. So therefore, if you want to do a bunch of donuts and get crazy with cornering, you need to have your suspension set very hard so it doesn't allow the fluid to travel very fast. It allows it to go nice and slow back and forth in the shock so you don't get that abrupt change in the suspension. However, if you're trail riding on a rocky surface and you want a smooth ride, you want that fluid to be able to go back and forth really quickly to absorb those impacts from the rocks and the abrupt changes in the terrain to give you a softer ride. My fault was I changed it to soft, then I decided to go do donuts, which helped lead to me rolling that vehicle over on its side. So this concept applies just as much to the automotive industry. Think of a Ford Mustang compared to a Ford Expedition. So back in the day when I had my 2001 Ford Mustang GT, if I had a rough day at work, I used to go behind a grocery store and do a couple donuts to relieve some stress from the day. I could do this without the fear of rolling because it had harder suspension, lower profile to the ground, giving it less ability to have body roll and lowering the center of gravity, which makes it less likely to roll. Now, when we had our 2001 Ford Expedition, I wouldn't dream of going behind and trying to do donuts because this vehicle is made for comfort, therefore softer suspension for a better ride, giving it more chance for body roll, and it is also a much higher profile vehicle, raising the center of gravity, and therefore giving it a much higher chance for the possibility of a rollover. So one other thing to consider also, guys, is, and it didn't really pertain to me because I do have the wider wheelbase, the long travel suspension on my RZR, but if you do have a regular RZR suspension, it is going to be more likely to go over, because the skinnier the vehicle is, the more likely that weight is going to transfer past that pivot point and possibly put you on your side as well. Another leading cause to going over on your side during a donut is letting off the throttle, because that will instantly give you traction. Now, I replayed this video several times to see if I did let off the throttle, and I might have just a little bit. But no matter what, if you are cornering and you are sliding the back end, you do not want to let off the throttle until you have straightened out for the most part and have regained good control. Otherwise, you might go on your side. This is a hard thing to train yourself, because your instant reaction is let off and step on the brake when the car starts doing something crazy. So the other silly thing that I've read about and seen a couple videos on is people actually trying to do donuts with the four-wheel drive engaged. So in order to do a donut, you have to lose traction. So why would you engage something that's almost going to double the amount of traction you get? So the last contributing factor that I'm going to talk about is weight distribution to begin with. You'll notice I've got a lot of accessories. The aftermarket roll cage is obviously at the top of this RZR, and it definitely weighed more than the factory roll cage. I also have that spare tire holder, and I have that storage box up top to hold all my tools and equipment. And that's not even mentioning how high this RZR sits off the ground in the first place. I actually didn't realize how much weight I had in that storage box until I went to take it off so I could work on the roof, because I loaded it with it on the roof. But that thing weighs a good 60 to 80 pounds, I bet. So because of this rollover, I actually decided to remove that storage box from the roof of my RZR. And I put everything in a plastic bin, and I'm going to put it in the bed of my RZR to help lower the center of gravity on my car. So one last time, guys, don't watch this video and think, oh, this guy said I can do donuts as long as I do these few simple things. That's not necessarily true, because again, every situation is different. And no matter what, these are still a high-risk vehicle to do donuts in because of how high profile they are. So keep that in mind. The main reason I made this video is I went to research the contributing factors that helps lead to you rolling over, and I couldn't find much. So I did a little research, plus based some things on my personal experiences, because the more you understand something, the less likely it's going to happen to you. So now real quick, I'm going to show you guys how I straightened out my roll cage. This took a lot more effort than I thought it was going to, which is a good thing. That means this roll cage is very tough, and it did take me a while to get this done. So here's a quick video of the view from the front of the RZR, so you can see how much more the passenger side is bent down more than the driver's side. So in order to do this repair, I had to use one of my split collar tube clamps. Now these come in different sizes depending on what size roll cage you got, and I was able to get them off of Amazon. This clamp is what allowed me to beat on that roll cage and clamp it and do whatever I wanted without distorting the roll cage itself. So when I had actually made my spare tire holder, I actually bought an extra set of these clamps just because I thought it might come in handy for something. So that worked out well. So the first thing I tried was grabbing a 1/2 inch thick piece of angle iron and clamping it in place. Then using a super heavy duty C-clamp that I could put a 1/2 inch impact on to tighten it down, I tried leveraging it back into place. However, when I was doing that, the angle iron was leveraging against the side of the roll cage, so then I tried getting some little pieces of plastic to protect the roll cage from the piece of angle iron leveraging against it. But it just wasn't working out. I couldn't keep the clamp steady enough while I tightened it down. It kept slipping off. Another thing I did to help protect the roll cage during this process was I used the cardboard insert on a paper towel holder, and I put that between the roll cage and the tubing clamp to help protect the powder coating. After messing with that for quite some time and getting frustrated, I scrapped that idea, and I just took a big hammer and started hammering on that roll cage clamp. And as you can see in this video, you can see the roll cage is moving by doing that. And I did that for quite a while, and it got a lot better. However, I thought I could get it a little bit more. And I actually have the benefit of being able to use an overhead crane, and I was able to lift up on the roll cage and then continue to smack it with the hammer, and that actually helped out quite a bit as well. I'd smack it around a little bit, then I'd get a tape measure, and I had 2 points I was measuring from, and to see if I was making a difference, then I'd move the clamp on the strap, leverage it in a different place, and try it again. It finally got to a point where it just wasn't going anymore, and I finally gave up and said it was good enough. So there might be some concerns about a weak spot in this roll cage since it did go over and bend it. However, there was no stress fractures in the steel, and with as much as it took to bend it back, I'm really not that concerned with it. Now, if this was a factory roll cage, that would be a different story. So after that was all said and done, my game plan was just to buy a new roof to put on. However, the wife said, if you're going to keep doing dumb shit, there's no point in buying a new roof, so you could possibly ruin it again. So at that point, I decided just to bend all the tabs back and try and straighten the roof as best I could. So I just leveraged it up and down a little bit using a rubber mallet. I bent the other spots, and I had put weather stripping underneath between the roof and the roll cage with help with vibration. So I stripped all that off, got some new weather stripping, and you can get that stuff at Lowe's or Home Depot. It's just one side stick and the other side is a foam pad. You can get it in different thicknesses. I believe I used a 3/8 thick weather stripping. So after putting the roof on and getting as many of the Allen clips in as I could, there was some that just weren't going, and I was trying to leverage them. That didn't work out, so I ended up using a die grinder to grind out the holes a little bit to get them close enough where they would go in. You could barely tell once I was said and done with it, and there is a couple that I just couldn't get, and I ended up just using a bolt and a nut to do those two that I couldn't get. So here's kind of a final look of everything, guys, after I got it all put back together. Now there is some damage, but just not worth replacing. Everything still works. I did put a quick disconnect, basically an extension cord end on the light bar, so I could unplug it and take it off if I needed to, since I had to take it off anyways. So as with every video I do, guys, I'm obviously going to make these adjustments, and the next time I go out, I'll probably end up doing some donuts, and I'll let you guys know one way or the other whether it worked out in a future video. So hopefully this video gave you guys some good information and it helped you out. If so, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. I've got all kinds of DIYs, all with the same concept. Give you guys the most information in the least amount of time as possible, so I don't waste your time. Hope to see you next time. Have a good one. Later.